Highlights from Marin will include environmental pioneers like Laura Lyon White and William Kent, the founders of the Marin Conservation League and MALT. David's recently published book, The San Francisco Bay Area and Environmental History, is half historical and half recent history. Copies of this comprehensive book of 632 pages with more than 20 color maps and more than 60 photos is available on our website. We did just sell through the first copies that we had ordered from David, but he'll be restocking us, so you can go ahead and place your order anytime. And David Schmidt is a lifelong San Francisco Bay Area resident, naturalist, and environmental historian. He worked as a writer in the Public Affairs Office of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in San Francisco from 1991 to 2021. An avid hiker and backpacker, he has led dozens of hikes for the Greenbelt Alliance, the Bay Area's leading land conservation organization, in the region's extensive public parklands. David has volunteered on habitat restoration projects for the Golden Gate National Parks and the California Native Plant Society in Marin, San Francisco, and San Mateo counties from 1991 to the present. He is also the author of Citizen Lawmakers, the Ballot Initiative Revolution, published in 1989. He has a bachelor's degree in history from Santa Clara University. Born in Mountain View, he lived in San Francisco for more than 50 years, just recently relocating to Santa Rosa. And he just gave his first book talk at the Book Passage in San Francisco yesterday, which apparently went very well. So please welcome David Schmidt.
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
And I want to say,
We have some feedback.
how do I stop that?
I think that's at Paul's end. I think we just have to, yeah, he's muted the other.
Okay, very
So we
good.
should be good now.
Very good. I just want to say I am very much at home with the California Native Plant Society of Marin. I've been a member of the Yerba Buena chapter in San Francisco for many years. And I've volunteered with the Yerba Buena chapter as well as the National Parks Habitat Restoration Team with Maria Alvarez in the Marin Headlands and other parts of the Golden Gate National Parks for the past 30 plus years. So yeah, I feel like I'm talking to my own colleagues, friends, native plant lovers. So hello and welcome to my first recorded talk on my new book, San Francisco Bay Area and Environmental History. In the course of researching and writing this book over many years, I've found things that would be unimaginable in today's Bay Area, but they're true stories reported by eyewitnesses over the past 257 years that show how people have used, transformed, and protected the Bay Area's environment. One story involves a Mexican general, Mariano Vallejo, who fought the Bay Area's native tribes more than 100 times before the gold rush in battles that involved 3 native leaders who gave their names to today's counties of Stanislaus, Marin, and Solano, and one North Bay tribe that fought so tenaciously with Stone Age weapons, including actual stones, that the Mexicans named them Los Guapos, Spanish for proud, brave, and fierce. And their descendants today are still known as the Wapo. Eyewitnesses in the early 1800s saw hundreds of grizzly bears roaming the oak savannas of the Napa Valley, the Santa Clara Valley, and even Ocean Beach in San Francisco, where they feasted on the carcasses of dead whales. By the 1890s, there were no grizzly bears left, except for William Randolph Hearst's lonely bear from Los Angeles County, Monarch, kept behind bars in Golden Gate Park, and now viewable stuffed at the Academy of Sciences. During the gold rush, San Francisco residents saw nearly half the city burned to the ground 4 times because there was no piped water system, no fire department, and the streets were made of wooden planks, all flammable. San Franciscans quickly rebuilt the city bigger and better than before each time, just as they did after the city's next catastrophic fire burned more than half of the much bigger city in 1906. Also during the gold rush and for a century afterwards, hundreds of Bay Area men toiled deep in underground mines, producing not gold, but the toxic silvery liquid metal mercury, also called quicksilver, because it appeared to be quick, that is, living in archaic English. If you had a little puddle of mercury in front of you, you could touch it or poke it and it would quiver, so it appeared to be living. One of these mines, the New Almaden, south of San Jose, created more wealth for its owners than any California gold mine. A generation after the gold rush, farmers planted 1 million plum, cherry, and apricot trees in a place called the Valley of Heart's Delight that stretched from Palo Alto to Los Gatos to present-day Fremont, surrounding the then small city of San Jose with a sea of white blossoming trees in winter and spring, all watered by wells without dams or aqueducts. And in just 20 years, from 1950 to 1970, the tech industry transformed these vast orchards into Silicon Valley. Starting in 1900, oil refineries were built on the bay and Carquinez Strait shorelines, from Richmond to Martinez and Benicia, fueling the cars, trucks, and buses that increased exponentially decade after decade, but causing oil spills, including a gasoline spill that set the surface of San Pablo Bay on fire for hours one night in 1922. That's the first of 61 toxic spills and leaks that you can read about in my industry and pollution chapter, and it's just a partial list. But you'll get a lot more than this in the book. You'll get the essential context for these and many more amazing true stories. Who was involved, how it happened, why it happened, and how it all connected to transform the open indigenous landscape of 1769, the year Spaniards riding on horseback from San Diego discovered the bay, into the Bay Area that we know today. Not least among these stories are the century-long struggles of thousands of residents, once known as conservationists, but more recently called environmentalists, who refused to listen to the conventional wisdom that said you can't stop progress, that's progress with a capital P, even when it was destroying the unique landscape they had come to know and love. They saved the redwoods. They stopped the seemingly inevitable diking and filling of the bay with tons of garbage, which I saw with my own eyes in the 1960s, and probably many of you did too. They stopped freeways. They saved hundreds of square miles of natural lands, farms, dairies, and cattle ranches. Their leaders were both men and women in the early years, including William Kent, who usually gets all the credit for saving Muir Woods, and San Francisco's Laura Lyon White, who influenced her husband, Lovell White, a banker at the bank that owned Muir Woods, to sell it to Kent in 1905 because she knew he'd want to save it. Kent was already well known in Marin for starting the Tamalpais National Park Association, a campaign to buy out the mountain's landowners to make it a national park. He didn't succeed, but in 1912 he formed the Marin Municipal Water District and led its purchase of the mountain's north slopes over the next few years and opened this extensive area to the public for hiking, and it's still open today. In the early 1900s, Marin was a rural county with most of its towns and small cities clustered around train stations on the county's eastern shoreline, or along Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, which also had a railroad line parallel to it. The first paving of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, by the way, was done by excavating the shell mounds that marked native tribal village sites along the bay and dumping the mix of shells, ash, and bones including those of Miwok Indians buried in the shell mounds, onto the highway. Very few of the shell mounds still exist today, but 3 of them are still protected in China Camp State Park. One woman, often seen trekking around Marin hillsides in the 1890s and early 1900s with heavy wooden plant presses on her back, was California Academy of Sciences botany curator Alice Eastwood, who cataloged Marin's hundreds of species of native plants and even discovered and scientifically described a native species of manzanita that was named Eastwood's manzanita after her. In 1934, 4 visionary women who anticipated that the Golden Gate Bridge would bring rapid urban development to Marin founded the Marin Conservation League, and they led conservation efforts in the county through the 1960s. Cephas Evers, Helen Van Pelt, Portia Forbes, and Carolyn Livermore. Mrs. Livermore founded the Angel Island Foundation in 1945 to transform the island from a military base into a state park and campaigned for 17 years to make it happen. That's why the island's highest peak was named Mount Carolyn Livermore. The Marin Conservation League continued under other leaders in campaigns to save Marin's open spaces every decade after that, and is still an influential force in protecting Marin's environment. From 1950 to 1970, Marin's population more than doubled from 85,000 to 209,000, and urban sprawl was physically merging the towns and cities in eastern Marin into a nearly contiguous urban area stretching from Sausalito to San Rafael to Fairfax, while once tiny Novato sprawled outward. By this time, Marin County had so many environmental activists that I can't mention more than a few of them, but you can read about many of them in my book. Marin environmentalists, including Supervisor and later U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, organized multiple campaigns to limit urban expansion. When the Marin Municipal Water District asked voters to approve a new aqueduct to bring water from the Russian River to Marin cities, the environmentalists warned that it could lead to further urban sprawl and another doubling of the population. They organized a campaign against it with the slogan, "Don't Los Angelize Marin." Voters turned it down by a resounding 9-1 margin in 1971. In the late 1960s, the county's planning department had a master plan that would have moved 124,000 additional people into rural West Marin, more than 12 times its existing population. Environmentalists worked with the planners to create a new master plan in 1970 to 72 that would keep West Marin rural. The new plan was published as a paperback book, very large format paperback book with the title, Can the Last Place Last? Maybe some of you have seen that book. The Board of Supervisors adopted it in 1973, and West Marin stayed rural. By the late 1980s, however, dairy owner Ellen Strauss of Marshall and her friend biologist Phyllis Faber of Mill Valley noticed that many dairy farms and cattle ranchers in West Marin had for sale signs at their entrances and feared that the land would be broken up into ranchettes with monster homes for a few dozen wealthy people. So Ellen Strauss and Phyllis Faber founded the Marin Agricultural Land Trust in 1980. The nation's first agricultural land trust, and it seems that they were noticing the for sale signs as early as the late 70s. So that's why they formed the Marin Ag Land Trust in 1980 to start purchasing conservation easements on ag lands in West Marin, with the stipulation that all landowners, including future buyers, could only use the land for agriculture. 40 years later, most of the ag lands in the rolling hills north and northeast of Olema are protected by Marin Agricultural Land Trust. Phyllis Faber, by the way, was involved in the 1972 campaign to pass the statewide Coastal Conservation Initiative, served on the county's first coastal commission to put that law into effect, and was a pioneer in the science of tidal wetland restoration, overseeing restoration of the diked, barren 120-acre Muzzy Marsh near Corte Madera to recreate a natural salt marsh. After the dike was breached in 1976, Phyllis returned several times each year for 20 years to monitor the return of native marsh plants. Lessons learned there were applied to much bigger salt marsh restoration projects in the late 1990s and 2000s, south of Napa and Sonoma, and in the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge in the South Bay, which is the largest wetland restoration project in the western United States. Phyllis also edited many of the books in UC Press's series of California Natural History Guides and served as the editor of the Native Plant Society's statewide magazine Fremontia from 1984 to 1999. Since that magazine published only in black and white during those years, she collected color photos of California's native wildflowers in their diverse habitats and published them in the stunning book California's Wild Gardens, A Living Legacy in 1997. If you don't already have a copy of it, you should buy one from CNPS if they still have them, and hopefully they do. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I need to mention that I worked with Phyllis Faber for many years on efforts to get my own book published, and she encouraged me to keep going decade after decade. She was this book's biggest advocate for at least 20 years. Sadly, she passed away in January 2023 before we could get it published. Now I'd like to turn to what was happening with the environmental movement in the rest of the Bay Area, starting in 1961, when Kay Kerr, Sylvia McLaughlin, and Esther Gulick founded and led the Save the Bay movement. In the early 1960s, it seemed like the small groups of environmental activists that existed at that time had little chance of stopping the air and water pollution, the bulldozers of rampant urban sprawl and freeway building throughout the region, the construction of nuclear power plants along the coast. But the activists kept trying anyway. A left-wing songwriter from Berkeley named Malvina Reynolds was in San Francisco one day in 1962, and from the top of a hill, she saw box-like houses under construction, row after row of them, on the north slope of San Bruno Mountain. She wrote a song with a catchy tune that helped turn the tide of public opinion against this kind of land development in the Bay Area's open spaces. Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. And because most of you have already heard this, I won't repeat the rest of it, but if you haven't heard it, just type into your smartphone, Little Boxes, Malvina Reynolds. In Sonoma County, in the early 60s, Rose Gaffney lived on a cattle ranch on Bodega Bay and didn't want to sell it to PG&E to build a massive nuclear power plant. But the county board of supervisors approved it and allowed PG&E to take part of her land anyway using eminent domain. PG&E's excavators soon gouged a circular 70-foot deep hole in the ground at Bodega Head for their so-called atomic park. But Malvina Reynolds joined the fight and penned another subversive song to help the few dozen volunteers organizing the opposition. This never became a hit like Little Boxes, but even though I don't know the tune, I thought it was worth a spot in the book. Here's the lyrics to that song. We've got to take over PG&E. It's become a dreadful pest. They're spreading atomic poison stuff all over the Golden West. They're starting a plant at Bodega, a place that was wild and pure. they call it an atomic park. It's an atomic sewer. By chance, a geophysicist, Pierre Saint-Amand, heard one of the volunteer leaders, David Pessinen, talking about their campaign on radio station KPFK while Saint-Amand was driving across the Mojave Desert. He offered to help. One rainy weekend in early April 1963, Saint-Amand and another volunteer, Doris Sloan, pulled up to the construction site on Bodega Head. The gate was open, but the gatehouse was empty. They walked right in, and Saint-Amand looked at the hole and found an earthquake fault almost immediately. It was only a quarter mile from the famous San Andreas Fault, which had caused the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906. PG&E was forced to abandon the site in 1964. Today, there's a 70-foot deep, circular freshwater pond on the site, but it's still known as the Hole in the Head. Back in 1963 and 64, it was front-page news all over the Bay Area. Environmental activists throughout the region were encouraged. They felt they could actually win, even against an opponent with all the power and money of PG&E. Local residents swelled the ranks of environmental groups. Many of them boarded charter buses to go to Sacramento to lobby their legislators to save the Bay. And they did save the Bay, once thousands of activists convinced the state legislature and Governor Jerry Brown's father, Democratic Governor Pat Brown, to sign the first ban on Bay filling in 1965. And they convinced a conservative Republican governor to sign the permanent ban in 1969. If you're as old as me, you could remember this actor turned governor starring in the TV Western Death Valley Days. If you're a little younger, you only know him as President Ronald Reagan. In the 1960s, the Bay Area's environmental movement picked up momentum and laid the groundwork for the environmentalism that swept America after the first nationwide Earth Day in 1970, passing national laws like the Clean Air Act of 1970 and the Clean Water Act of 1972 that cleaned up polluted air and filthy waterways nationally, including San Francisco Bay. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, full disclosure, I am a former employee, was founded in December 1970, played an important role in cleaning up the Bay, issuing construction grants to 29 local governments and wastewater treatment agencies around the Bay, totaling more than $1 billion to build secondary sewage treatment plants that actually did clean up the Bay by 1985. Bay Area environmentalists, including many in Marin, led the movement to save the entire California coast with an initiative based on the Save the Bay laws of the 1960s. As I mentioned, voters statewide passed the Coastal Conservation Initiative in 1972, and then the legislature and Governor Brown followed with a law to make the Coastal Commission permanent in 1976, and it's been working for the past half century to preserve our dramatic coastal lands and waters. In San Francisco in 1969, the federal government offered to sell Alcatraz Island to the city because it was a closed federal prison and they didn't need it anymore. The Board of Supervisors in San Francisco proposed to turn it into a tourist shopping mall with a plaza celebrating the first moon landing that happened that same year. By this time, the Army was getting ready to shut down Fort Mason and Fort Funston in the city and Fort Cronkite in the Marin Headlands. San Francisco's Amy Meyer founded and volunteered full-time for more than 2 years to lead People for the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which proposed to turn all these areas and much more land stretching from Fort Cronkite to Olema into the Golden Gate National Parks, passing a bill sponsored by legendary San Francisco Representative Phil Burton and signed into law by President Nixon just before the November election in 1972. And also instrumental in that campaign was a medical doctor who had been president of the Sierra Club, who lived in Marin County. He lived to 103. Does anyone know what his name was? Anybody out there? You'll have to unmute, otherwise we can't hear you.
Marty Griffin?
No, not Marty Griffin. Who was the head of the Sierra Club? Another medical doctor who was head of the Sierra Club in the 70s. Let's see. And he was very interested in saving natural lands in Alaska. He helped get that bill passed.
Dave Brower?
No, this was a Marin
Ed Wayburn.
Wayburn, Edgar Wayburn.
Ed
Thank you.
Wayburn.
Yeah, that's the one, Edgar Wayburn. And of course, his wife Peggy was very active too
Peggy also.
in all of his campaigns. So, all right, so they got that done. President Nixon signed it. In the following decade, in the 1980s and 1990s, the Bay Area's tech innovators led the world in developing solar and wind power in the 1980s and 1990s. That's when the first windmills appeared up at Altamont Pass. And this helped to spread clean power systems worldwide over the past 40 years, technologies that are now crucial to replacing the fossil fuels that are causing global warming. And also in the past 30 years, from the mid-1990s till today, environmentalists, wetlands scientists, and civil servants in state and local governments, and federal government, including my former colleagues at the Region 9 office of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, pioneered the science of wetlands restoration, building on the work of Phyllis Faber, restoring thousands of acres of sterile salt production ponds and diked hay fields back into habitat for birds, fish, and endangered wildlife like the salt marsh harvest mouse and the California clapper rail. For the past century, Bay Area residents have led the nation in environmental protection. But it's not just environmental activists, it's also the millions of voters who passed the bond propositions to put their tax money to work to get all these good things done. And the Bay Area's landscape has been preserved for the most part, despite the fact that the Bay Area's population has grown from 1 million in 1900 to nearly 8 million today. If you've ever lived in the Bay Area, the stories in this book are your stories. You may know a few of them already, but there are many more. There's really something in it for everybody, from hunters to historians, from builders to biologists, to anyone who wants to know where their drinking water comes from, or how recycling got started, or where the toilet water goes. This is the biography of your region, and now it is available from your chapter of Native Plant Society at a bargain price of only $40, which is, that includes tax. If you bought it from a bookstore, it would cost $60 plus tax, around $65. So yeah, you can get it from your Native Plant Society chapter for only $40, including tax. And I've got plenty of copies to sell. And at this point, I'd like to open it up to answer any questions you may have about Bay Area environmental history. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask me your question.
Actually, David, I think before we go into the Q&A, if I can put David Long on again for the second part of the poll for the
Sure.
Election, then I'll just, for those of you who might have missed an opportunity to vote, if you're a primary chapter member of the Marin chapter, then please do vote in the poll that David will put up shortly. And our slate is for President Kristen Jacob, myself, Vice President Stacy Pogorzelski, Treasurer Bonnie Gosliner, Recording Secretary Woody Elliott, Board members Eva Buxton, Paul Da Silva, Ann Elliott, Rob Katz. He won't show on the printed ballot. That was an oversight, but he is on the slate. David Long, Carolyn Longstreth, Laura Lovett, and Eddie Robertson. So here's the poll.
Again, this is for members that joined after the first poll. We want to make sure that you have a chance to vote so that we can make our quorum requirements. I think looks like we picked up everybody we're going to pick up. So thank you again.
Thank you, David.
And let me just say one more thing about my book. It's really comprehensive. It covers just about everything that could be considered environmental that ever happened in the Bay Area. I got a chapter on native tribes, one on wildlife, one on fisheries, chapter on invasive species, which includes native plants and invasive plants, fires, floods, and droughts, earthquakes, agriculture, mining, logging, energy infrastructure, industry and pollution, urbanization, population, urban sprawl, parks and land conservation, water supplies, sewage, pollution, garbage, waste disposal, recycling, transportation, saving the bay and coast, environmental pioneers and leaders, and ecological restoration. So this is, the only book that covers all that territory. And in fact, it's the only history of the Bay Area that's been published since the 1980s. So I know that if you get a chance to see it, you'll probably like it. So again, I'm open to questions about any of those topics.
David, this is Nona Dennis. I've been involved in Marine Conservation League for quite a number of years. And also, I'm really looking forward to looking at reading your book. Until this time, my history of environmentalism in the San Francisco Bay Area has been kind of largely Richard Walker's book, The Country and the City, which he wrote in 2007. And I do recommend that as a geography of how the entire Bay Area became green, shall we say, that it can go along. It doesn't go into the details that yours does, but as a companion, it is a absolutely essential book to know about how the Bay Area became so uniquely green in every part of it. So Richard Walker, professor of geography at UC Berkeley, wrote in 2007, The Country and the City. So I recommend, along with your book, that people also consider that.
Right. That comes from University of Washington Press, I believe. And it's definitely a book that is well worth reading. It's a history of the development and the parks and the open space preservation throughout the Bay Area. From about 1900 until 2005. And it really covers that topic very well.
Right, exactly. Well, thanks. We're looking forward to getting your book. I already have it on order, and I think I paid something like $75, but I'm not certain where.
Well, that's because you paid for tax and shipping from Humboldt County.
Probably Timber Press.
Where it's Backcountry Press.
Backcountry Press. Sorry, not to. Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for your summary today.
Sure.
Right.
Other questions or comments?
Just in the chat, congratulations on this epic endeavor. I look forward to reading this book. That's Karen Partoyan-Hulleran.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, David. I it was really nice to hear all those things about the Bay Area. I've lived here my entire life, and I really want to read your book now because I didn't know like any of that, and especially with like the place names, I just think that's fascinating. All these places that I never really knew where they came from, and they're all attached to some sort of history of the area. So I thought that was interesting. I was wondering if you knew anything about filling in marshes in Novato for mosquito control. And I think that it happened during the 1900s, but I'm not sure. I heard that somewhere, and I'm not sure if that's true or if that happened.
It's much more likely that they diked the marshes and turned them into hay fields. That's what
Okay.
happened south of Sonoma, and some of the restoration efforts now involve opening the dikes and turning the hay fields back into salt marshes. But yeah, I'm not familiar with what happened in Novato, early in the 1900s, but it was probably diking some of those salt marshes and turning them into hay fields.
Awesome. Thank you.
And you mentioned place names. One of the things that I actually was unable to squeeze into the book because it was too long already was a list of the few native place names that remain on the map in the Bay Area. And there's just a few of them that come to my mind right away. So I'm just going to tell you what they are. And some of them are on the map of my, the native tribes map of the Bay Area shows certain places that had tribal names, such as Olima and Sonoma and Napa. The Mayacamas Mountains was named after a tribe that lived in the Napa Valley. They were called the Maacama, and they were one of the Wapo tribes that got the reputation for being brave and fierce. And there's also, there's Olompoli. That was a native village site with that name. And the head man of that village was able to get a land grant from Mariano Vallejo. So he got his land back, although it then was owned just by him, not by his whole tribe. And there's also down in the Santa Clara Valley, there's a very tall mountain that just towers over the Santa Clara Valley, and it's very visible. It's called Mount Umanum, and that's about the only part of the Bay Area that retains a name that comes from the Ohlone words, which meant place of the hummingbird. And of course, Umanum sounds like a hummingbird, and so does the English word humming. So, yeah, and there are a couple of others, but most of the native tribal names are long gone. But you can see them in the map in my native tribes chapter.
That's awesome. Thank you. I never expected Sonoma to be a native tribe name. I just assumed with with the A at the end that it was some sort of Spanish derivation, but that's super interesting.
Yeah, most of the Bay Area names that have a San or a Santa are Spanish, from the Spanish-Mexican era. Although in one case they got it wrong. They named San Quentin after an Indian. He was not a saint. He was a rebel against the Spanish. But somehow the Americans got there and kind of got the story wrong and called it San Quentin.
Fascinating. Thank you.
In the chat, Barbara Gallios asks if the book includes history of the Point Reyes Peninsula, and also any mention of sea otters and efforts to reintroduce them?
It does include history of the Point Reyes Peninsula, both the agricultural history as well as the history of how it became a national park. So that's in two different chapters, the agriculture chapter and the parks chapter, parks and land conservation chapter. And in the wildlife chapter, I have a history of the hunting of sea otters and how they became so scarce they were thought to be extinct along the California coast. And then in 1938, a raft of sea otters, that's a group of sea otters floating in the water, was discovered off the shore of Big Sur at actually off the Little Sur River mouth. And ever since then, they have been slowly repopulating the Central California coast. And I don't have a lot on the reintroduction of sea otters, but there's a little bit in there. So, it's not just a natural repopulation, but, people have been trying to help the sea otters repopulate their former landscape. And they have come all the way up into most of Marin County, although they're rarely seen in Marin County.
Okay, any further questions?
I have a question. You reminded me of it when you were talking about place names, and I did some mapping for the county. There is an arroyo in the Novato area called Arroyo John Jose, Janhosa, and it's often corrected to San Jose, but I think it's originally named after somebody with the spelling Jan. I was wondering if you had investigated that and how you've done your research and what you found.
I haven't heard of that. But based on the spelling you just gave me, it sounds like what was originally meant was Juan Jose, Juan, second name Jose, Juan Jose. That's a common Spanish name. For my name research, I relied on a book of California place names by an author named Goody, Gudde. It has been published in several different editions. And it's pretty much the last word on California place names. And I think it's just called California place names by Gudde.
Yeah.
Thank you. And a couple people have their hands raised. Jill, oops, you lowered it again. But Clint?
Hi. Very interesting. I was wondering, the Bay Area is known for some synergy with Silicon Valley and innovation and the universities here. And I was wondering if there was some point where the environmental movement got its start, and then it kind of bloomed and blossomed and really took off here. If there's some particular year or series of years in which that happened.
I would definitely say it happened during the 1960s. And one of the major, in fact, probably the major force was the Save the Bay movement, because that involved people in all 9 counties, and thousands of people joined that campaign. It was very popular. There were Save the Bay bumper stickers all over the place. And Harold Gilliam, who was the environmental columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner, they had a merged Sunday edition, and he had a weekly column. And Gilliam wrote about what was happening with the environmental movement all over the Bay Area, and that's what allowed the people in different parts of the Bay Area to find out what people in other parts of the Bay Area were doing. So he helped popularize the Save the Bay movement as well as many campaigns around the Bay Area to preserve the natural landscape and clean up polluted water. Definitely, it was the 1960s. It built and built and built because they needed to pass two separate bills to save the Bay. They passed a temporary one that was only for 5 years. They got that passed in 1965. Governor Pat Brown signed it, and then 90 days later it took effect. And on September 17th, 1965, additional filling of the Bay became illegal, and it pretty much stopped almost immediately. And it didn't immediately stop the dumping of garbage into areas that had already been diked. But once those areas that had already been diked were filled with garbage, there was no more filling of the Bay. And many of the other environmental groups got started or picked up momentum during the 1960s. And I would say from 1961 to 1969, it just grew and grew and grew, and it became a force to be reckoned with at state and local government all over the Bay Area.
In the chat, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and that momentum carried over into the 1970s when additional laws were passed at the local, state, and national level. A tremendous amount of momentum all the way through the 1970s.
Jeffrey Perrone asks if you can say anything about mercury mining in the area east of Calistoga.
Sure. There was a major mercury mine in the hills. Well, I guess you'd call them mountains east of Calistoga. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was probably going for about 50 years from late 1800s to early 1900s. And that, was just one of about 50 mercury mines that operated around the Bay Area. And they were roughly arranged in an arc that went from just north of the Russian River at Monte Rio. There were two mines called the Mount Jackson, and I forget the other one, but there was two mines real close together. And then there were a lot of mines in the Mayacamas Mountains and in the Geyserville area, where the geysers are and where the geysers steam power plants are today. There were a lot of mercury mines in that area. There was one on the shores of Clear Lake, the Sulphur Bank mine. There was one on the east side of Mount Diablo. There were several in the Mayacamas mines, both north and south of Calistoga, on both sides of the Napa Valley. And then there were three major mines in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and one on the one in the Diablo Range that was in what is today San Jose. There's an area of San Jose called Silver Creek, and it was named after the quicksilver mine that once existed there. And these mines have caused a lot of mercury pollution in the Bay, and it's from runoff from the mines, but not just that, but also most of the mercury was used in gold mining, because mercury has a very unusual property, and that is that if there's any gold, even tiny specks of microscopic gold, and you mix it with some mercury, the gold will dissolve into the mercury. And then you can take that mercury that has gold in it and heat the mercury to evaporate the mercury, which of course is very toxic. You better not breathe it because it can kill you. but anyway, they would collect the vapors of this mercury and condense it to, get it back into liquid mercury and use it again. But the gold, I mean, if you heated up this gold and mercury that was, gold dissolved into the mercury, once the mercury evaporated, what was left would be pure gold. And so it was used in mines all over the California gold country, as well as the silver mines in Nevada and a few gold mines in Nevada. And all those, gold mines in the gold country that were using this mercury, they didn't get all of it back when they, got the gold from it, and some of it was left when the mines were abandoned, and the mercury flowed downstream into the rivers and creeks, and it's still there, and there are a number of lakes in the Sierra foothills where the fish have dangerous levels of mercury in them because mercury moves up the food chain. Even though it doesn't pollute the water to the point that you make it undrinkable, it's very low levels in the water, but it can build up in the food chain and become a toxic level in the fish, even though it doesn't kill the fish, but it can harm anything that eats the fish, such as bald eagles or people. And there's a lake down near the Almaden mercury mines, which has fish in it that are so toxic that fishing is not allowed at all. But yeah, there were at least 50 mercury mines operating in the Bay Area in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And each time there was a war in the early 1900s, like World War I or other wars that happened throughout the world up until World War II, mercury was used in detonators on bombs and explosive artillery shells. Mercury salts. It was these compounds of mercury which would explode if you dropped them. And so those were inside the detonators of these bombs and artillery shells. And the mercury, when the bomb hit the ground, the mercury would immediately explode, and that would explode the rest of the bomb. Without the detonator, the bomb would be a dud. So the mercury mines opened and closed during the 1900s, early 1900s, depending on whether there was a major war going on somewhere in the world. And of course, eventually the Defense Department, bought a lot of this mercury during World War II, and then they didn't need it for bombs anymore because new types of bombs were developed. And so the Defense Department was left with this strategic supply of tons and tons of mercury that nobody wanted. And a little bit of it was used for things like barometers and thermometers, and actually switches on things like washing machines. But nobody has been using mercury except in very small amounts since the 1960s. So the last mines that were barely open at all closed in the early 70s. But yeah, it's one of those stories about past industries that created huge amounts of pollution, and people at the time either didn't notice or didn't care. But the people who worked in those mercury furnaces, where they took the rocks that contained mercury that were mined out of the ground, and they put those rocks in a furnace and burn a bunch of wood to heat up that mercury to 1,000 degrees or more Fahrenheit, and that mercury would evaporate, and they'd collect it just kind of like a still that produces whiskey and other alcoholic drinks, because the mercury would cool as it went through a series of pipes, and it would condense back into liquid mercury that could be collected at the end of the pipe. And but somebody had to be emptying the furnaces that were filled with these rocks, and there was still mercury steam coming off the rocks, and they would breathe a little bit of mercury, and they could not work 5 days a week, month in, month out. They had to take a week off every month because they were getting sick from the mercury. And of course, this was very, very, very bad for their health, and probably some of them died from it.
And then Jeffrey also comments that the detonators were made with mercuric fulminate.
That's exactly right. They were called, these mercury salts or mercury compounds were called mercuric fulminate, and that word fulminate means that they burned or exploded very easily.
And Jeffrey also asks if you have any information about undergrounding of creeks in the East Bay.
Yes, that's part of the ecological restoration chapter, and I have several pages about creek restoration in the East Bay, and also the creek restoration in Alameda Creek, where the focus has been for the past 30 years, removing obstructions to steelhead and salmon migration. And there have been over two dozen obstructions removed at Alameda Creek, because various agencies were collecting water from that creek, and they had a number of small dams. And one of them was the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. They were getting water out of the creek. In fact, they have a large watershed right next to Alameda Creek, near the Sunol Regional Park. They have a big dam up there, the Calaveras Dam. So a guy named Jeff Miller, who was the head of the Alameda Creek Alliance for the past 30 years, he negotiated with all these agencies, and eventually, with the help of the Endangered Species Act and the fact that these fish were declared threatened or endangered, he was able to get the agencies to cooperate to gradually remove all these barriers to fish migration. And just in the past year, steelhead have been observed moving downstream, and part of the restoration effort involved actually netting the fish that couldn't get over the obstructions, netting those fish, trucking them up to their spawning areas, and putting the fish in the spawning areas where they actually did spawn and create new, little fingerlings that, just in the past couple of years have started migrating downstream. And just in the past few weeks, after the big rains that we saw a few weeks ago, several salmon were observed in Alameda Creek, swimming up that creek for the first time in at least 100 years. So it's a great success in stream restoration on Alameda Creek, and also a great success in the underground. I mean, removing these underground creeks that were, buried 50 to 70 to 80 years ago in the East Bay in cities like Berkeley and El Cerrito. And those creeks have been daylighted. That's the term they call it, daylighting the creek, where they, break up the culvert, they open it up, they restore it to the shape of a creek, and plant a lot of native plants, a lot of willows, and that has been done. And steelhead trout have been seen moving up those creeks also, full-size steelhead trout, 16, 17 inches long, and spawning in those creeks. So great success there. And I know there've been a couple others around the bay, but the East Bay has had the most successful daylighting and the greatest number of daylighting of creeks. And I went over there in 1995 when Codornices Creek was daylighted, and I took a photo of it, which you can see in the book. And there's volunteers working in that creek bed with picks, old-fashioned miners' picks, swinging it over their heads to reshape that creek bed.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Well, thank you all for listening, and I'm glad that I'm able to speak to you today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David, and we'll keep ordering your book.
All right, very good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
And join us in January, mystery guest. I'm still working on the speaker, but I'll pull something out of a hat for you. So come back and see us then. Thank you all. Good night.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Thank you.